Hey, all, welcome back to Exile Wargaming, where today we're going to be talking list building and strategy in the new Harlequins detachment, the Ghosts of the Webway. So, first things first, when we're preparing for a tournament or we're trying to dive deep into a codex and really figure out what works best for us, we have to look at both our units and the detachments and what they bring to the table. I always like to address the strengths and weaknesses of a list so that I can adjust my play style accordingly. Some of the strengths in the new Harlequins in the codex would be some really solid OC. All of our units have gone from OC1 to OC2, which allows us to kind of contest and trade on objectives a little bit more efficiently. We have an abundance of units. We're incredibly fast. We have a lot of movement tricks and shenanigans. Our core units are very strong and versatile, and we trade very well, with most of our units being able to trade up on a pretty regular basis. But there are quite a few weaknesses as well. One of the main ones being that we struggle into high toughness or stat check style armies. This could be Chaos Knights. It could be any of the Demon Primarchs. It could be armies utilizing a ton of heavy vehicles. Land Raiders, Redemptors, you name it. We have limited models to choose from, so it kind of puts us in this box where we don't have many good options unless we dip into the Eldari Codex. And beyond this, in the Ghosts of the Webway, we had zero significant damage buffs. All we really got was Chegarax Coil, and our troops get dev wounds without needing a troop master attached to them. But overall, most of our damage has gone down, especially when comparing it to the Index Detachment. Without the reroll to hit and the reroll to wound, a ton of our units just flat out went down in their damage potential. So some of the standout units that I like to build my lists around would be as follows. One, it's the Harlequin troop itself. This is our bread and butter. It's the most versatile thing that we can put on the board. We can attack medium to light infantry. We can punch up into heavy infantry. We can also get into vehicles or monsters with our devastating wounds. Is a unit of troops going to bring down one of those things by themselves? No, but multiple units stacked together tend to be able to get the job done as long as the dice are cooperating just a little bit. The troop master is an absolute must. I believe at least 2, if not 3, are necessary in every single list. It takes a 5-man troop to something very scary, and it takes a big 10-man troop, especially with something like Chegarax Coil, into something that can really handle all comers. The Star Weaver is absolutely incredible and I believe crucial to our game plan, allowing our units to disembark, fire their fusion pistols, maybe throw grenades, or maybe charge a unit. Then the Star Weaver moves up with them. The Harlequin troops themselves wipe the enemy unit. They get back in the Star Weaver, and it allows us a little bit of extra protection from our opponents. The Star Weaver is crucial in out activating our opponent later on in the game. I think the Solitaire is an absolute must in every single list. Depending on how you play him, he could change the dynamic of an entire game. And then I'm also really enjoying the Death Jester right now as well, especially with the new enhancement. When we're digging into heavy infantry or vehicles, sometimes all of those sustained hits threes really make a difference. Generally, into traditional infantry, Death Jester isn't going to do too much, but there's a lot of tricks that we can use with him in order to force our opponent out or allow us to score and stand on midfield primary objectives pretty regularly. As for some of the other units, I definitely feel like they have a place. They just aren't something we want to build our entire lists around. I think the Shadow Seer brings a ton of versatility, especially with the Mistweave. Maybe we want to infiltrate it into the midboard early on in the game, threaten Bloody Dance. Maybe we can use our reactive move, then ambush our opponent with a huge unit of Harlequin troops, grenades, a bunch of fusion pistols, and devastating wounds afterwards. Or we can rapid ingress it to a different point in the game, making sure that they are protected from enemy firepower with that 18-inch lone op. It just brings a lot of utility to us depending on who we're going to play against. I think the Skyweavers in the Index were phenomenal at their role of bringing down tanks. What we typically expected was 6 to 9 devastating wounds from a unit of 2 of them, maybe a couple more with the Star Bolus. Nowadays, we are happy to walk out of a turn with something like 6 devastating wounds into an enemy vehicle, and more often than not, it feels like 3. Without the reroll to hit, without the reroll to wound, they just feel a lot less consistent. The other thing I do not really enjoy about Skyweavers is their base sizes are huge, and we don't have access to a fire and fade stratagem. That means we are exposing one of these units almost 200 points to bring down a unit that's traditionally going to cost far less than them. They may not bring it down, but they are going to be brought down relatively handily in the clapback. It just doesn't trade as well as it did before. Now, the Zephyr Glaives are a different story. If we're going to use our Skyweavers to skirmish, bring down some Marines or some light infantry, they do a very, very good job at that. It just seems like they're a little confused on what role they need to play. And then when we get to Void Weavers, this is just a unit that I find a lot of difficulty with. At 125 points, I would rather play almost anything else. If the Void Weaver was 110, maybe 115, I would consider it, but its damage output is minimal. There is a sweet spot between 24 inches away and 18 inches away where it could do something impactful, and outside of being a home field objective holder and then maybe using Exit the Stage to support other units later on in the game, I just don't see a ton of value. Which means if we're going to try and shore up some of our weaknesses, we're most likely going to have to dip into some Craftworld units. Now, of course, we can run a Craftworld list itself, but we love Harlequins. So I'm not looking at spamming our lists with any of these units. I'm looking at filling our lists with a few of these to shore up those weaknesses. Eldrad is not a bad option. We do need something to hold the home field objective anyway. Getting that extra CP is pretty nice, as the Ghost of the Webway Detachment is pretty CP hungry. And then if you really needed to, poking them out to give your army +1 to wound on a substantial target, maybe in the midboard or one of the outer objectives in the second or third turn of the game. Most likely, this is a one-trick pony though, and Eldrad is going to be brought down as soon as he exposes himself. So this is kind of a one-trick pony. I've run a few games with Eldrad and found while it's awesome on the turn that he activates, it is not the greatest thing any turn afterwards. I think the Viper is a solid unit, not because it shores up any weaknesses at all, but because it's 65 points, gives us a little bit more on the MSU side of things, and allows us a cheap unit to either hold the midfield, screen the backfield, all of that, so that our Harlequin troops can go out and utilize their grenades, fusion pistols, and devastating wounds to deal on harder targets. The last thing that we want in a Harlequin army is our troops just doing actions and holding objectives. They have to be active every single turn in order for us to find success. The Viper just allows them to go do their job a little bit more efficiently. Now, the Wraith Lord is a very, very interesting choice in that the Shadow Seer is a Psyker, so it can confer a lot of its bonuses off to this. The Wraith Lord is also very, very durable. It brings in a lot of heavy firepower and a couple Bright Lances and the Ghost Glaive itself. If we are struggling with enemy monsters and vehicles, the Wraith Lord at 140 points, I believe, is a really solid option. Paint its face to look like a clown, and we are ready to go. I think the Wave Serpent provides a ton of utility. It allows us to cart around our big unit of Harlequin troops where they can disembark, safely fire all of their fusion pistols, whatever it may be, but it also gives them that extra 3 inches of move afterwards. I think the Falcon is still pretty wonderful for Harlequins. I do think that a Falcon with a unit of 5 troops and a troop master is much more effective than a unit of 12 troops and a troop master on foot. The math shows that they are very, very similar, but in my opinion, I would much rather have the extra defense and the splitting of units by running a 5-man and a troop master with a Falcon rather than one giant brick of Harlequin troops that can be wiped out by almost anything on the board afterwards. So I do enjoy the Falcon. But the one thing that I really feel like shores up our biggest weakness in monsters and heavy armor is just bringing a couple units of fire dragons. The fire dragons right now, regardless of their points, if they were 120 points, I would still probably recommend bringing 2 units of fire dragons into Harlequins because they are that good at the job and the role that they provide for us. We don't have anything in Harlequins that can do what fire dragons do, and for their cost right now at 100 points, I feel like it's almost a no-brainer. You bring 1 Wave Serpent with 2 units of Falcons or Fire Dragons, and you are doing really everything that you wanted to. Now, this is just a bullet that we are going to utilize for 1 turn. If you need to bring down a Land Raider or the Silent King or a Keeper of Secrets or whatever it may be, you can push those Fire Dragons up, make sure you're trading efficiently, and then let the rest of your army just go off and do what it needs to do. So with all of this in mind, our strengths, our weaknesses, our stratagems, and the units available to us, now we can start building a list for competitive play. But before that, we have one last step, and that's to identify the different portions of our army that we need filled. So one would be a home field objective holder. Do we want a unit of 85-point Harlequin troops sitting in our backfield for the entirety of the game, or is there something else we may want to dedicate towards that position? We need something to be that initial point of engagement, something to bring our opponents out and fighting in the midboard or on the outer objectives. We need something to complete actions and screens. Again, we don't want these to be our Harlequin troops alone or our troop masters or our lone ops every single turn. We want something else to provide this for us later. We need something to hold the midfield objective, and then we need a few units to deal damage. Every single one of our units can go out there and put a good amount of chip damage onto our opponents, but we need a few heavy hitters. Something with the troop masters, maybe troops coming out of Falcons, maybe big bricks of Harlequins, some anvil style unit that can essentially deal with a target on its own. And beyond all of this, throughout Harlequins, one of our biggest strengths is that we have a high unit count. This is crucially important for us because we do not have the durability like a lot of other armies. What kind of substitutes for durability, though, is activations. It doesn't matter how many great units our opponent has if they can't activate enough times into us afterwards. So just having a high volume of units is sometimes defense in itself. So with all of these things taken into account, we can start building our lists. What I want to show you from here are quite a few iterations that I've gone through in my past about dozen games or so with Harlequins and where I'm starting to land within each portion of it. Now, if I'm going to play something like Mono Harlequins, this is most likely what my list is going to look like. It allows me a good bit of flexibility, but it's not my favorite by any means of all our options we have with Harlequins moving forward. This unit has 2 Troop Masters, one with Chegarax Coil, and it also has a Shadow Seer with the Mistweave. Now, you can also just use a 3rd Troop Master if for some reason you just absolutely hate the Shadow Seer, but I love the utility that it brings. Being able to infiltrate that midboard, again, threaten to Bloody Dance or use the reactive move early on, kind of creates an interesting puzzle for our opponent to solve, and a lot of times they do not solve that puzzle fast enough. So I do really enjoy having that unit there. Now we're also bringing 2 lone ops. I do like the Death Jester with Murder's Jest. You don't really need Murder's Jest on this though if you don't want to take it, and the Solitaire is an absolute must. What we're doing here to shore up some of our roles, maybe midfield objective holders, engagers, is utilizing our lone ops to do just this. We may park the Death Jester on an objective for the entirety of the game. If he's got a Star Weaver nearby, you can make sure he's continually kind of fire and fading back into that if you needed to, if he was safe from indirect fire, or you could just park him right there. The Death Jester and the Solitaire themselves can both be resurrected. This means your opponent has to bring these down 4 times and get into range of them. As long as you're doing it the right way, you don't want them both to get clapped into on a single turn where you lose them. But if you do this the right way, you can continually force your opponent out. This is really, really great on outer objectives. We have a big unit of Harlequin troops for either the Troop Master with the coil to go into or the Shadow Seer with the Mistweave. We're bringing 5 units of troops with 5 Star Weavers. Then we have 4 units or 3 units of Skyweavers. One is a 4-man with Haywire and Glaives. The other are just 2-mans, and then 1 Void Weaver with the Prismatic Cannon. What we're going to use the Void Weaver here for the most part to do is most likely exit the stage if the Skyweavers aren't doing it and just support any of the outer objectives. Now, this list is a little bit rough in that it doesn't have a dedicated unit to hold the home field. For the first couple turns, if you're worried about something like indirect, I would just dedicate the Solitaire or the Death Jester to that until you can deal with some of those problems. But essentially what we want to do in a list like this is just ambush our opponent. If we're coming out behind walls or whatever it may be, we want to disembark our troop, throw grenades, shoot with fusion pistols, maybe we attack, and then continuously just re-embark inside of our Star Weavers. If you are prioritizing your targets appropriately, you could put your opponent in a pickle where they don't have that many good activations in the Star Weavers for the late game, which is pretty nice. What I would use in a list like this is my typical initiator. Would either be a unit of Harlequin troops inside of a Star Weaver on an outer objective, or a unit of one of the small Sky Weavers to push forward and force your opponents out to begin with. We wanted to make sure we have units to engage. The Sky Weavers are actually great at that, and then use the big man to start hunting tanks or whatever it is afterwards. This list is coming in at 17 total units at 1,995 points. It gives us a lot of options. There are quite a few things that we can do by adding some Craftworld counterparts in afterwards, but if you want to go mono Quins, this is not a bad place to be at all. So what we'll see here is almost the exact same list, except we're going to remove that big 4-man unit of Skyweavers and the Void Weaver. 2 units that aren't super great at filling the role they need to fill, and we're going to replace them with 2 units of 5 Fire Dragons and a Wave Serpent. We actually go up 1 in unit count as well, making our list a little bit more efficient. What this list does is allow us to just punch up, utilize the Fire Dragons as a bullet, and deal with that hard target whenever we need to. We don't have to gamble. We're getting rerolls to hit and wound and damage. We have some protection and utility with the Wave Serpent, and we're still getting a Twin Link Bright Lance instead of a Prismatic Cannon. We're getting 1 Shuriken Cannon instead of 2 in the trade from the Wave Serpent to the Void Weaver, but we're also getting a ton bit more durability. So this list just really highlights what it can look like if we just replace a few struggling Harlequin units with our Eldari counterparts. I believe this to be the closest thing to a competitive, almost mono Quinn list that we're going to see out there. I've been loving this list. I have about half a dozen games with it now, and it is absolutely incredible. Now, if you have a bunch of Falcons available, you want to dive a little bit deeper into the Eldari Codex, this is what I would recommend. I've played this for a few games. It was super fun, very, very competitive, and it has the ability to just cripple your opponent inside of just a couple turns. So we're bringing 2 Troop Masters, a Death Jester, and the Solitaire. Again, we are mainly using the Death Jester to just hold an outer objective, threaten the reanimation, just continually force our opponent out. Instead of a big brick of Harlequin troops, we're going to be bringing 6 5-man units, with 2 of them being inside of Falcons with the Troop Masters. This essentially does comparable damage to a big brick of Harlequin troops each. So this is like bringing two 12-man units with a troop master out there, even without factoring in the Falcon's damage itself, just its rerolls. It's very, very close on the math. We are bringing 4 Star Weavers for our troops to continuously disembark and re-embark into, and then 2 units of Skyweavers. Most likely, we're going to be using these Skyweavers to dictate the fight on the early turns of the game, especially if our opponent doesn't have a ton of tanks or whatever it may be. If they have monsters and not tanks, we are throwing our Skyweavers away as quickly as we can. They're going to be our early engagers, kind of our skirmish pieces. We're bringing those 2 units of Fire Dragons inside of a Wave Serpent just to utilize them as a bullet at any point in the game if we have to deal with that hard target. And then our Falcons themselves are just going to be the big counterpunch. Something really, really fun about this list is we can, as long as you set up your turn appropriately, disembark a unit from the Falcon, give it all the rerolls, right? Then re-embark another unit into that Falcon and use that original unit, Star Weaver that's now empty, to pick up the unit with a Troop Master afterwards. So you kind of have to play your turns out the right way, but as long as you're doing this on the outer objectives, it's pretty easy to set up. But we just want to make sure that we're constantly protecting our troops, especially those with the Troop Masters. So sometimes you're going to have a unit of troops outside of a Star Weaver waiting to re-embark into a Falcon it wasn't in the turn after, and then we're going to be utilizing their Star Weaver to pick up our troops after they get out of a Falcon later on, if that makes sense to anyone at all. But there's a ton that you can do in this list. It's hyper competitive, it is hyper fast, it allows you to collapse in on your opponent in whatever turn they need to, and then continuously kind of force them out with the lone ops on the objectives in the early game. We're still coming in at 19 total units at 1,995 points. If I was going to a tournament tomorrow, this would most likely be the list I would take, not because I believe it to be the absolute best, but it was the funnest out of all of them. So guys, I know this was a short one. It's not a battle report, but I do hope you enjoyed and maybe you figured out a little bit why I build lists the way that I do, and what I'm finding some success with in this edition so far. I really look forward though to hearing what others have found successful. I do expect a bunch of people in the comments to say that they're loving Void Weavers and Sky Weavers right now, and that is perfectly great and fine. They just don't necessarily fit my play style. But if you are enjoying the Ghost of the Webway Detachment, I could not be happier. These games have been fun and exciting. It's something new to dig into, and I look forward to each and every game. But thanks again. Take care. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see y'all in the next video.